Welcome to the season 2 finale of Third Song In with Tom Polachek and Chris Derrickson. Can't believe we're at our season 2 finale. I don't think anyone thought we would make it this far, but we have. Looking forward already to season 3. But for our finale, we had a very special opportunity. Tom was able to talk to world-renowned harmonica player and teacher and engineer and inventor, I think. I think those are all applicable terms. Joe Filisko. I know Tom has studied under him and has known Joe for more than 20 years. He got an opportunity recently to talk to him, and that's what we're going to focus on for our season finale.
So yes, as Chris said, we are very proud and happy to welcome our first kind of renowned guest to the podcast. He's a friend of mine who has traveled the world playing and teaching harmonica and the blues in general. I'm very happy to welcome Joe Filisko to our podcast. I'm stealing most of my introduction from Wikipedia. Wikipedia tells us that he's an American blues harmonica player and maker of customized harmonicas. Says he's based in Chicago, Illinois, but I know that's not true because he doesn't live too far from me in Joliet, Illinois. He was named Harmonica Player of the Year in 2001 by the Society for the Preservation and Advancement of the Harmonica. He works very closely with the Hohner Harmonica Company, and they describe him as the world's foremost authority on the diatonic harmonica. He designed cover plates for some of their special editions. And these days, he teaches, he performs a lot, both in person and via Zoom. And his role as a harmonica teacher is how I first met him probably 25 years ago now. Way pre-pandemic and pre all kinds of things, including all 3 of my kids. But I am very, very happy to have you here with us, Joe Filisko.
Thank you. I appreciate you having me, Tom. Thank you very much.
I'm not sure how much of our podcast or earlier episodes you've heard, but we kind of did this as a lark because we're about a half a country apart, and our main contact is texting songs back and forth in the form of playlists. But when he convinced me we might want to try to do something like this, yours was one of actually the first names I thought of when we started talking about whether we could have guests. Because A, I know you're really nice and would probably do it. And B, I think you have a really interesting backstory. And I think our listeners would be interested to hear how you came to the position you're in right now.
Wonderful.
So as I said in my introduction, as Chris mentioned in his early on, first and foremost, I think you're a player. A harmonica player that is very well known. I've watched enough of your performances, both in person and online, to see that, when you play on Zoom, the people that are commenting, and as the comments scroll across the right side of my screen, are from all over the world. It's not just Chicago. It's not even just the United States. Tell our listeners a little bit about how you found the harmonica as the instrument that you clearly love.
My mother is German, and I had a number of harmonicas in my play box growing up. There were a couple of times I probably was an early teenager that I picked it up and tried to make sense out of it. But it really wasn't until I was in college and I was listening to a lot of blues, a lot of acoustic blues stuff at the time, and was hearing the harmonica in it. And I was actually in a college band that we were doing a blues song, and we had a local harmonica player come and sit in. And I found it to just be really mysterious that the blues sounds in particular that would come out of it, I just found to be like, how can it be that something so small and pocket size is capable of such a wide range of sounds, especially expressive sounds that are really bluesy. And then I found myself, which was really a big turning point, I found myself reading a little article of how to play blues for the guitar player. It was a little blurb that just had some basic information in it. And it mentioned the concept of cross harp, which is a pretty important thing for playing blues. It essentially means that you're not playing the harmonica in the key of the exhaling chord, the key that's stamped on the harmonica. You're playing it in the key of the inhaling chord, which is the 5 chord of the exhaling chord. So then that really enables you to immediately get a bluesy sound right from the beginning. And so then I went back to my box of junk, pulled the harmonica out, and then was starting to actually get some forward momentum with it. I was beginning to understand some of the concepts and bending and such. And I would say that was really like the early point. And I was already a fairly accomplished guitar player at the time, so I had a fair degree of music in me. And once I picked the harmonica up, I just could never put it down. I found it to be so intriguing. And I would say that while the guitar is ultra visual, that is what you do with your fingers and how you strike the strings, the harmonica was the almost complete opposite of it. It's extremely non-visual. And that really was very appealing to me, like trying to make sense out of, trying to get music and sounds out of something that had virtually no visual cues that went along with it.
That's certainly one of the things to me that's most interesting to watch anybody play, but I've probably watched you play more than anybody else. And the things that you do, the techniques that, that you teach, but also that, you've mastered, and the fact that you can't see any of it. It all seems to be coming without you moving your head, your face, the harmonica barely. The harmonica is basically covered by your hands, or at least by most players' hands when they play. And there's still all these sounds coming out, which, I would say was probably what drew me to the harmonica. Roughly the same time period, probably when I was in high school, I got interested in it. But when I heard about the concept of cross harp, it scared me away because I just didn't understand what it meant. So what drew you in, I think, is what pushed me away for another 10 years or so before I even tried to learn how to play.
Yeah.
So when did you start playing guitar?
When I was in high school, it was I guess I would say that my father hoped I would become an athlete and perform at the decathlon in the Olympics. And I just was more of a artsy fartsy mama's boy. And the guitar really was a huge release for me. I just found that was my escape in my teen years when there was chaos going on in my life. And I could relate to it because I'm actually very gifted in terms of hand-eye coordinated things, artisan things. I have a lot of artisan in my blood. And that, of course, is what enabled me to successfully do work on repairing and modifying and upgrading harmonicas.
Did you start taking harmonicas apart and figuring them out pretty early on after you decided you wanted to play, or was that something maybe you did before that?
Pretty shortly after I started. One of the things that I happened across was a club that met every week in Elmhurst, Illinois, that was called the Windy City Harmonica Club. I started playing a year or so earlier, and year or two earlier, and it was like about 1990, I think, that I ventured up there. And there was a gentleman in the club, Wally, who had a fair degree of skill at doing basic repairs and things on harmonicas. And And it was, I think it was with him, just seeing him do it, that made me realize, well, I can do that. I can take the thing apart. It kind of helped take away the fear that, you might open it up and all kinds of springs would shoot out all over the place and you'd be left regretting that you ever messed with it. So I think that helped.
You definitely described my mindset. I even when there were times where a hole might be plugged and I was afraid even to open it up to try to clear it because I thought it would just be like a cartoon and everything, it would be 10 pounds of springs and other pieces of metal in a 5-ounce container.
Right.
And so, as I understand it, that beginning, that line of taking them apart, figuring out how they work, really did lead for you to another part or another side of the world of harmonicas, as opposed to just playing and performing. From what I gather, you've done a lot of work with other professional musicians, and that you're frankly very well regarded in terms of kind of being the guy that can properly customize or work on harmonicas.
Well, I've served my time and developed my skill set. I happened to, I ran into a player that took some photographs for me of some of the work that I had done, and he was connected with a photographer and people at the Joliet Herald News newspaper, and they ran a story on me that was with color photographs and everything. And so I got a lot of notoriety and a lot of advertising for doing that. I still didn't really know too much about like the workings of it, but I got a lot of attention. And I think that a lot of professional players heard about it, and it was a novelty because there really was not anybody in the country that was doing any sort of thing trying to make the harmonica play better. So I really developed a lot of relationships from that time period and through that initial article that came out in the local newspaper.
Because as I understand it, prior to that, most, even your most famous players, the people touring the country who even laymen would know were great harmonica blues players, they pretty much played their harps out of the box.
That's correct.
I mean, because I remember reading when I was just starting out all kinds of crazy, and I shouldn't say crazy because I don't know if they worked or not, but you read articles about soaking the harmonica in water and that would change the way it played, or doing this thing or that thing, all of which I was scared to death to do. But from it sounds like the reality was that most people just they bought it, they opened the box, and then stepped up to the microphone.
That's pretty much it. Yeah. There wasn't a lot of options, and initially I would hear rumors about people that allegedly tried to take it apart and do things. But there really wasn't anybody. So there was this novelty of what I was doing, or I should say, in truth, the professional players that I met at the time really didn't know of anybody else that was trying to do anything like
it's right time, right place, it sounds like.
Yeah.
And what kind of things would you do at that stage of your, kind of technical development in that? What would you do to the comb? Or, I mean, were you building things from scratch, or how did it work?
I was building some stuff from scratch. I was trying to modify the comb in terms of its thickness and the shape of the holes, experimenting with a hole that was sort of round, tapering into a narrow slot. And I was building my own, creating my own, forming my own brass harmonic cover plates and things. I had some pretty fancy things going on, but I also, what probably is going to be really bone jarring to a lot of people is to hear me say that all that stuff was pretty cool, but if you couldn't play, it wasn't going to make you sound good. It really wasn't. It wasn't the trick to being able to play the harmonica. So I kind of really let a lot of that stuff go, because to me, it was a distraction to really getting to the core of what really is the true art of playing the diatonic harmonica. That is what my specialty is. That is the harmonica that you're typically going to hear when you're listening to blues and country and folk and rock and old-timey music and Cajun music. And I think I want to say also that very initially, when I picked it up and started having a lot of fun with it, when I would inquire to like even the inquiries that I put forth in the late 1980s with the Hohner Company, really there was so few people that knew like why it worked, how it worked, and could explain anything. I remember having a nice brief phone conversation with the guru at the Hohner Company at the time, Rick Epping, who has gone forth and really made a nice reputation for himself. But there was like this instrument that was supposed to be one of the most popular, arguably the most widely sold instrument in the whole wide world, but there was so little information about how it worked, why it worked, how to go about playing it in certain styles. And that was a gigantic driving force, trying to really get to the magic as to how did Sonny Terry actually get those sounds out of the harmonica? Was it the harmonica? Was it a special effect? Was it a magic amp that he had? Was it fairy powder that he sprinkled on it or something?
Okay, is it fair to say that the original harmonicas, when they were built, and even into the 80s and 90s, they weren't really built to be blues instruments so much as blues players took them and made them into blues instruments? Is that a fair statement, or what would you say?
Well, I'm sure that the creator, the original designers, had no idea that that was going to happen. But on the other hand, if you look at the history of the diatonic accordion, which is basically a harmonica that you squeeze, and instead of blowing into different holes, you use your fingers to press down keys, in that tradition of where, like in South Louisiana, where the diatonic accordion is common, they have a tradition of using it to play in the key of C when they're squeezing it, in the key of G when they're pulling it apart. And so that is a parallel to the harmonica.
Right.
When we play blues, we're basically just inhaling around that dominant 7 inhaling chord, and that's a huge part of getting a bluesy sound on the harmonica. So it's not some real magical thing that happened. It's just that the people that didn't know anything about music picked it up and realized that they could get a very different tonality when they focused on the inhaling part of the harmonica.
You mentioned some initial contact with Hohner, who, and again, I think even laymen would recognize that Hohner as kind of being the leading and most historic maker of harmonicas. But as I understand it, and based upon things I see online occasionally in advertisements, you're pretty closely associated with the company now. What's your role with Hohner now?
I oversee the Hohner Affiliated Customizer Program, which is the elite group of gentlemen that are committed to upgrading diatonic harmonicas predominantly to a very, very high, consistent level of playing, response, tuning, and comfort, I guess, is a really good way of putting it. And it was kind of a deal that was too good to pass up, to be involved in that and have access to parts and stuff much more inexpensively than a lot of other people. So
That's cool.
yes, yeah.
That's interesting. Well, so let's talk a little bit about my favorite part, and a part I understand at least slightly better, which is your performance, because the mechanical
Sure.
side always escapes me in just about any field. But you've been playing obviously, for years, and I know that currently you play, if not solely with Eric Noden. I know that the two of you play together mostly, at least from what I can tell. What's going on the performance front for you right now?
We right now are in the middle stages of putting together a brand new collection of material, which we will feature live in May at our Roots Duo Festival, our online Roots Duo Festival, which folks can find out about at the webpage rootsduo.com. All our material really is original, but completely deeply steeped in all the American roots music, folk music, blues traditions that great players have done on the acoustic guitar and the diatonic harmonica.
And I also know, of course, COVID, shut down a lot of people, and I know that as a result of that, I watched quite a few of your performances online. And I know you continue to do that with Eric. Is there anything coming up soon that involves you two performing live on Zoom?
So keep in mind, it's actually not Zoom that
I'm sorry, yeah, that's become the Kleenex, it's the
right,
generic term.
right. It's a platform that Eric actually created. We have some events coming up, I believe, towards the end of April that are intended to promote the festival that we're going to do, which is going to be, I think, 3 online workshops and 2 concerts. But we do have some free events that we're going to do in preparation for promoting in order to promote the festival. And those are at the end of April. I don't have those exact dates memorized, but folks can find out all about that at rootsduo.com. One of the things we're going to do is a workshop talking about the equipment and stuff that we use for performing and recording, which seems to be a real hot topic for most harmonica players nowadays, wanting to know what you play through, what's your mic, what's your amp, yada, yada.
Yeah, as Chris mentioned, my initial contact with you the first time I met you was as a student, as you were a teacher, and I've never yet quite gotten to the point where I'm too worried about the equipment other than the harmonica itself, because I feel like I have so far to go. I'm embarrassed to admit that since the last time you and I had any teacher-student conversations, I have not been practicing as much as I ought to be, although I do still carry a couple in the car and work on pieces here and there when I can, but I want to put my nose back to the grindstone. But can you talk a little bit about your teaching? Because I feel you have a very specific style. It feels to me like you've spent a long time developing an approach to getting people from the point of not even knowing how to hold a harmonica to being able to pull off some of the other types of I don't want to use the word tricks, but techniques, things like bending notes and getting different sounds out of the harmonica. Can you describe a little bit what your philosophy and your approach to that?
I can. I've basically always been self-employed. So when I wasn't trying to give guitar lessons, shortly after I started playing harmonica, it was something I was trying to do. I was trying to even with what little knowledge and skill I had, I was looking for folks that, wanted to learn from me. It was always something I was doing. As I got to know many professional players with the repair and customizing work that I was doing, I would always ask them, who should I be listening to? Who are your favorite players? What are the best recordings? Trying to learn from these guys that were alive and were known to be some of the best players around. And then I pretty quickly came upon a list of the musts, the must listen to, must study. In the early 1990s, I decided to up my game and try to take my teaching to the Old Town School in Chicago. And that became something that I was doing, not every day, but I was doing it on a very long, 1 day a week situation. So the real short version of the story is everybody would agree like who the greatest players were when it came to like Chicago blues, for example. So, for example, Little Walter, who had a like #1 hit in the 1950s with his instrumental Juke, would agree that, that was the high watermark for something that you should know about if you were going to play blues on the harmonica. And so quite literally what I have been doing since that time period was taking players like Little Walter, Big Walter, Sonny Boy 1, Sonny Boy 2, Sonny Terry, and reverse engineering their playing so that it could be accessible to somebody who had a very, very, very limited amount of skills and abilities. And with the goal that if you start here on level 1 and continue to, advance yourself just like the school system, kindergarten, first grade, second grade, on and on. Same thing with the harmonica, trying to build a easy to follow platform of, these are the foundations of the harmonica, the fundamentals, work on this stuff and build on top of this gradually. And one day, if you put in enough work and enough commitment, you may be able to recreate some of the stuff that the greatest blues harmonica player of all time, Little Walter, did and recorded.
Well, and you use a term for some of the stuff that you hand out, so to speak, to your students, of the study song, which is not a term I had heard before I heard you say it. And truthfully, and again, as a little bit of background, I first took lessons from you about 25 years ago. I then, and I loved it, but at the time it had to be in person, and it was at the Old Town School, which is on the north side of Chicago. And I was living in Joliet. Unbeknownst to me, you were also living in Joliet. And it just became too difficult to do, especially after kids were born and what have you. So I returned about 20 years later, and during COVID was able to take lessons through, online. So I could tell you from my own kind of experience with that huge gap that, first of all, your teaching was miles better, or maybe I was a better student. It may be a combination of both, but the amount of study songs and material that you had developed in that time period was tremendous to me and made it so much easier to try to learn and to motivate you to learn, because things, as you said, you would break them down to very basics in your blues harp 1 level. Then as you went through 2 and 3, etc., you could just build on it. And I think it's an amazing approach. And I'm a little curious about how you create these study songs and then how you build them up to improve people's playing.
Well, I want to be very clear that a song like Juke should be thought of as a doctorate level
Right.
song. So somebody that's been playing for just a few years is really foolish to be trying to think that they can play Juke, because they're missing all the layers of complexity that are in it. So with that being said, in my journey to reverse engineer these things, I've really come upon some things that I think of as the fundamentals and foundations of good playing. They are things like, for example, something that I referred to as hard shuffle chording. Well, anybody that can breathe can play the harmonica. And if you can breathe with rhythm, you can make music on the harmonica. part of that has got to do with the chords that are on the harmonica. So all we got to do is be able to count to 2 and do 2 inhale breaths and 2 exhale breaths on the chord with rhythm. And here we are already recreating some basic blues stuff, just being able to go. Now, something like that, which I'm confident I can teach to somebody from day one with minimum or no skills whatsoever, is applicable forever as long as they keep playing, because that kind of rhythmic stuff you will hear in a song at a much faster tempo, like Juke, that little Walter did. So it's finding stuff like that that is accessible to beginners, but is still usable no matter how advanced of a player that you become.
Yeah, and I could see, and perhaps it was because I was just a bit of a better student by the time I came back, but I could see, and I think I progressed much more quickly. I started at the bottom again, but got past some stuff that really stopped me. And some of it I think was because the materials were easier for me to understand, but also I think it had a lot more to do with me just listening better as you went through. But that's absolutely what you would see, is you would start with those things and then add something to it and talk about it in a class, or, demonstrate it as you just did. And, all of a sudden, more than you realize. You kind of sneak up on people that way, I think.
That is true. There's a lot of things that if you try to intellectualize and explain, it can just be confusing, because keep in mind, we're talking about the art of sound with a minimum amount of visualizations, and then trying to translate that into words can be very confusing, as opposed to just saying, just imitate this. Here's one chord, play this chord. No, breathe in the other direction. Now you got it. Right. I mean, so you're building on stuff that the player can do. And I got to say too, I don't remember you that well from 25 years ago.
Right.
But when we started that relationship up again, I was instantly impressed with you as a student, because I could tell that you are actually doing the work and actually working on exactly what I was telling you was the issue. I mean, I have enough experience with the teaching that I can tell if people are taking my criticism, my critique, my feedback serious, or if they're not taking it serious. Sometimes, my feedback might not be clear enough, so they're doing something else. And then I have to kind of tweak that and dial that in so that it's a little bit more precise. But with you, it was just like, wow, this is like great. I mean, he's progressing like crazy. Of course, he's doing what I'm telling him to do.
Right, of course. Although I think that's consistent, because I wanted to make sure that although Chris isn't here right now, that you made it clear that I'm absolutely the best student you've ever had. I think it's fair to say that, right?
You are the dream student, because you make teaching the most filling. Because for me, if people are progressing, then of course that's a bit of an ego boost, because I know that they're, following my advice. And it seldom do they progress if they do it their way.
Right.
That's just kind of the way it works. But it sounds like I'm bragging, but I have really based my method of teaching totally on trial and error, knowing that, geez, I've been trying to explain this concept this way, and it just doesn't seem to be working. So,
well, especially with an instrument where you can't, it's very difficult to show anybody anything, right? With the harmonica. I recall when I started way back when, the first time around, you had a little device that was basically, I think, the handle of a milk jug that was cut away, and you would put holes in it to kind of show what the front of a diatonic harmonica would look like. And that was primarily for the purpose, I think, of explaining how to tongue block, which is a particular technique, which I know you're There are different schools of thought, but tongue blocking is what you believe is the best way to play blues harp, and I agree. But that's about the only thing you could show in terms of technique is, hey, if because you could hold it up and press your tongue against it, and you could see the holes that were covered and the ones that weren't.
Right.
But everything else, you can't see anything.
Right.
And that's, I think, what frustrated me the first time around. And I didn't, frankly, just didn't put the time in that I needed to, and probably wasn't as good a listener back then either. One of the things that I would like to talk about is something that is just very consistent with our podcast. Chris and I are list guys. Lots of the top 5 books, the best 3 movies, all that kind of stuff. And I did give you, I hope, enough lead time to think a little bit. But I was wondering if you could give us a list of recommendations in terms of music to listen to, songs or pieces of music to listen to, that you do feel are kind of good places to start if somebody's interested in the blues, and in particular blues harmonica.
Well, everybody that has an interest in playing blues on the harmonica should be familiar with that instrumental entitled Juke by Little Walter. It's quite the brilliant masterpiece. Not easy to play, but that is definitely something to be familiar with. One of the other instrumentals that really enthralled and fascinated me was an early harmonica train imitation by a player from Georgia called Palmer Maccabee. And the piece is entitled Maccabee's Railroad Piece. Being able to take a tiny, humble instrument like the diatonic harmonica and use it to recreate the enormity of a train is really quite a thing. And I do feel like my personal progress spiked because I was working on fundamental type stuff like the train imitation from very, very early on. Another player who also had a huge influence on me, one of the most alien of all diatonic harmonica players, is the player out of North Carolina by the name of Gwen Foster. And he recorded a song with Tom Clarence Ashley called Bay Rum Blues. And you can hear his very unique chirping, fluttering kind of style where he's playing up on the higher notes of the diatonic harmonica, the Bay Rum Blues. Sonny Terry recorded a live song with his partner, Brownie McGee. It came across as Drinking in the Blues. And it's a very interesting song because it starts off with Sonny Terry kicking the song off, and then there's a stop time part in the song of which Brownie McGee sabotages Sonny Terry, changes the key of the song on him, and goes off in a different direction. And Sonny Terry, rather than having a meltdown or having a temper tantrum or doing something negative, finds the right harmonica and then continues to blow this astonishing instrumental that fortunately they captured. Somebody recorded this, and it is called Drinking in the Blues. If you want to know and hear some of the very, very unique things that Sonny Terry did as a harmonica player, you can hear it in that.
That's funny because I can remember one of the primary lessons I think you always had for us when I was in group lessons with you was, don't stop playing. You may, and in fact will, make an error or hit the wrong note or do something incorrect, but just play through it and find the rhythm and go back to it. So I believe I've heard that song, but it's been ages, and I'm actually gonna, as soon as we're done, I'm gonna go back and listen to that one again because I'm a huge Sonny and Brownie fan anyway. That's what got me into the harmonica myself way back when, like in junior high.
Cool. It really was only in the last about 2 years that I went back studying Sonny Terry again in preparation for an online workshop. And I came to the conclusion that Sonny Terry, he has to be the greatest diatonic harmonica player of all time, just because he had more unique stuff going on than anybody else. So Sonny Terry. Another one of the instrumentals that really, I think, features the amplified playing of Little Walter is a kind of medium slow blues called Sad Hours. The sounds that he gets on that instrumental are mind-blowing. And it really, I think, was listening carefully and transcribing that instrumental that I realized that Little Walter had a really phenomenal way that he controlled his breathing when he played, that I really don't think hardly anybody else has actually recognized and called it for what it is. It boils down to him being the master of the inhale breath control.
Yeah, and I'm not sure I let you finish or allowed you to describe maybe fully the whole study song approach that you have, but that approach is to listen to these classic tunes, right? And then you manage to break them down into tabs or you know the paper or at this point the digital document that we can look at that shows where to draw and to blow and what different techniques to use. And it comes from just listening closely to these kinds of songs, right?
That is definitely true. It is listening to them with insane detail and really looking at what are the roots of doing this? What are the deepest parts of the roots of doing this? It's really easy to listen to some of these songs and see and hear all the upwards fanciness and all the upwards growth. But when you listen to a song like Sad Hours, you have to recognize that there's also downwards foundational growth that is not so easy for the uninitiated to detect. And that is
Right.
what I'm always trying to do. You know, you look at a tall building, you never marvel at the foundation that's holding it up. And it's really the same thing with music. Something that is really a phenomenal piece of music has got fundamental foundational building blocks that are allowing it to stand up and be supported. And speaking of that, the song by Fred McDowell and Johnny Woods, Shake 'Em On Down, one of the things that's so amazing about that song is basically the rhythmic chording that he's doing in it. Playing chords are the easiest thing to do, but playing chords with the explosive rhythmic precision that you hear Johnny Woods execute in Shake 'Em On Down is also one of the more difficult things that you could possibly do involving rhythmic chording, playing the harmonica. So it's a really interesting paradox if you try to dig deep into it and understand it on its deepest level.
I just had a little bit of a flashback of hearing you tell me that these things need to be more explosive. That's been a weakness of mine, I believe, ever since I came back. For you to hear you say that in this context makes me laugh a little bit.
Yes.
Well, those are. I'll stop you there. I think that's a good list of 5 songs that we're gonna, get to the listeners out there. I believe most of those we can link to YouTube versions of those performances. I'm going to go back and re-listen to the ones I've heard before, but there's a couple there that I don't think I've even heard. So I would be remiss if I didn't at least ask if you have a little time to play something for the listeners, because I believe, having listened to, frankly, a lot of live and recorded blues, dude, you're really good, and I'd love to have some people hear how you play.
Yeah, sure. This is a diatonic A harp here.
sounds so good. It's been a while since I heard you play, actually.
Thank you. Thanks.
Well, thank you for that. As I said, I think that's a treat for everybody. Chris is going to be pissed that he didn't get a chance to hear that live. So I want to make sure that we plug stuff for you. Rootsduo.com is the best
Yes.
place to look, as far as I can tell, for live performances, workshops, that kind of thing, correct?
That's correct.
Do you,
Yes.
what about your site? Do you want to plug that? Do you want to plug
Yes.
the teacher side of things?
Yes, the study songs that I've been developing, really since I started teaching professionally are all available for download at filiskostore.com. Working on them without the assistance of a teacher may be challenging, but if you reach out to me at the contact email, I can appoint some teachers that are in the Chicagoland area or are doing it online. I'm happy to give recommendations, but I do think that my material is some of the very finest out there. If you're interested in the big sound and the big tone of traditional blues styles and Chicago blues.
Well, I can certainly vouch for that. As I said, I believe you're one of the best players. Certainly the best I've heard live. But I
Thank
also
you.
can vouch for your real skill as a teacher. And as I said, it's kind of interesting because I think, yeah, as with anybody, I think you're so much better now than you were when I first met you. But the ability you've had, I think, to help me get through, the plateaus and the hard parts of trying to figure stuff out is really impressive. And I would recommend you to anybody, and recommend the study song approach that you have. And I would say, make sure you check out filiskostore.com as well as rootsduo.com, because if you're interested in traditional blues, there's really no better place to go as far as I'm concerned.
Thank you.
Brings us to our favorite segment of the show, Post Facto.
It's a mistake. It's a mistake.
What do you got, bud?
All right, so there are two things. One was a clear gap in my information when I talked about one of my recommendations, which was for the Bob Dylan biopic, I'm Not There. I mentioned that a bunch of different actors played versions of Dylan throughout his life and his career. And I mentioned one of them was a woman. The actress who played Dylan kind of I want to say just before he went electric in the movie, was Cate Blanchett, who was, of course, a famous award-winning actress who's done many great things. But I thought it was such an interesting casting choice to pick her to play him. It was kind of him with the Wayfarer shades and dressed with a coat and tie on. And like I said, I think just before Newport Folk Festival when he went to electric, if I'm not mistaken. The movie also it had a great cast that I didn't mention last week, which included Christian Bale, Heath Ledger, Richard Gere. There were others as well. Some of them were playing versions of Dylan, and some of them were just playing, players from his life as the biography went along. But anyway, I wanted to correct that, and I also wanted to point out I talked about another movie and the soundtrack from the movie Detroit, and the music group that it follows is a real life group called the Dramatics. And they were never very famous. I don't think they ever hit it big. And that movie is one of the reasons, because during the Detroit riots, one of them was killed, and as I described last episode, it's a tough scene and a tough movie to watch. But the group was called the Dramatics, and I wanted to point that as well. And that's really it for me for Post Facto. Hopefully whatever other mistakes I made will go unnoticed. The next thing we want to do is we want to talk about our playlist picks. These will be the final two picks for our third song in season 2 playlist, which you can find on Spotify. That's where it started when we first began the podcast. It's also on Apple Music, Amazon Music, and YouTube Music. That will be, by the time you hear this podcast, the playlist should be updated, and we hope you enjoy them. We are, as I think, as usual, trying to go along with the theme of this week's episode and genuflect a little to the harmonica gods, as Joe was able to point out some really great stuff earlier in the episode. Chris, you want to give us your playlist pick first?
Indeed, I would, because I am very intrigued by yours. Mine is an interesting one. So I was thinking about this. There's not a ton of songs that come to mind for me with a heavy harmonica bass to them. I know blues is an easy place to find it. I don't listen to as much blues as I know you do, Tom. So what I did is I actually went into my text and I did a quick search for the word harmonica, because I remember saying to you, I think you're going to like this song because it's got some great harmonica pieces to it. And I found it almost immediately. It was from like October 2021, so a good 3 years ago, 2.5 years ago. And the song was the very song that I mentioned at the end of the Food Shrine episode. I did not choose it for my playlist then, but you were talking about, was it Engine Joe, I think, and the barbecue?
Yes.
And I was like, that reminds me of a song that's
That's
about
right.
a barbecue joint. And it's Adam Carroll's Screen Door, which is from 2000. And the album is Looking Out the Screen Door, from the same year. He's very much a folky type of singer. He's got the voice that Tom and I love so much. It's a little off. I would not argue that it's pretty at all. But I love his lyrics. I actually listened to more of the more of the album today. So the story is he's in love with the waitress. She's in love with someone else. And he never refers to that someone else by name. He always just calls them the tool pusher. I listened to a couple other songs and he mentioned the tool pusher as well. So he must have a thing against the tool pusher, whoever that dude is. But the song starts out with a really, I thought, impressive harmonica piece. I'd love to hear what Joe maybe thinks about that song. And then after, I think the first couple verses dives into it a little bit more. My favorite part of the song is this one. It's, "You ask me what have I got, darling, when I go back home. I got a trash sack full of rib bones and a pocket full of songs." He's writing songs for this woman that he adores. He's in love with the tool pusher. And the end is he watches her walk out the door with the tool pusher. So, sad song. Shockingly, I came up with one about a barbecue joint and a guy that works in the kitchen, takes home ribs and writes songs about this woman that he's in love with. But focus on the harmonica pieces because they're pretty good as far as I'm concerned.
Yeah, you sent that song to me quite some time ago. I do love the harmonica in there. Those lyrics are blues lyrics, even though this is not a traditional blues song or in the blues form.
Yep.
They're pretty damn good.
What's your choice for this week?
Real quick, just because it's the last episode, and I would hate to deviate now. I've got a runner-up. Just the one though. Yeah, I actually I started out with more, but I came to the table with just the one, and the song is Easy, and it's a famous harmonica instrumental. There's no vocals at all, which is why I ended up not picking this for the playlist, because I'm as you do, I tend to love songs with lyrics, and I like to hear how they're delivered. It was by Jimmy and Walter is what their performing name was. Jimmy DeBerry and Big Walter Horton, who's, and again, a famous harp player. Easy is just the coolest song. I do recommend that you look it up and find it. The version I have is from a 1992 compilation called Blues Masters Volume 4 Harmonica Classics. That's the problem with a lot of this. I was trying to figure out exactly when it was originally performed, because it was way before 1992. It's an old blues song. But yeah, the thing about blues music is there's a new compilation like every month. It seems like there's a new set of, somebody collects a whole different set of recordings of the same song. So it's, for me, very difficult to kind of get through and figure out sometimes. But the reason I was going to pick it is because it's one of the first songs that Joe would give as study songs for us to learn in early classes, like in the Harmonica 1 classes. And they'd be very simplified versions of what is a very complicated and cool song. But you could learn the simplified versions very easily, and it just felt cool. It was like one of the first songs that I could play, play all of the bars of, and just feel like I was actually a musician. And that feeling would go away as soon as I tried to play a more complicated version. But anyway, Easy is worth listening to. It's not my pick for the final song on the season 2 playlist. That is Bye Bye Bird by a performer named Sonny Boy Williamson. Again, I have it from a relatively recent album, not anymore, I guess, but it's from a 1997 compilation of his work called Sonny Boy Williamson, His Best. That one, again, it probably came, I don't know when he originally recorded it, probably in the 40s, it was probably 50s, early 60s maybe. What's funny about Sonny Boy Williamson is that there were 2 of them, 2 very talented, 2 relatively famous blues musicians that both went by the name Sonny Boy Williamson. The one that I'm recommending is Sonny Boy Williamson 2. He's my favorite of the 2. His actual name was Rice Miller, or at least that was one of his actual names. It sounds like he was kind of a sketchy character and went by a lot of different aliases at certain points. There was a player named John Lee Curtis who went by the name Sonny Boy Williamson. As I understand it, he was born in 1914 and died in 1948. Sonny Boy 2 was performing in the 50s and 60s and even into the, as far as I remember, 80s and 90s, still playing. And Sonny Boy 2 is, not only is he just an amazingly talented harmonica player, he is just funny as hell. And he has a bunch of songs in different compilations where they just kept the tape running so you could hear him talking in between, or when he mess up, he would talk and correct people or correct himself. And he just sounded like an old Southern blues man that was just always having a great time. But he had a short temper too, and you could hear that in his songs. This one, Bye Bye Bird, doesn't have that kind of, at least my recording doesn't have any kind of breaks in it where you hear him talk. But he does sing, and he's just got this weird, I think he was very old when he sung this particular version. But it's just the combination of this really, really Southern blues voice and this amazing ability to talk basically through the harmonica is absolutely worthwhile. And I think it's a good finish to the season and to the playlist for this season.
Nice job. I did look it up because that's all I can contribute when it comes to some of this stuff. Looks like Bye Bye Bird was first recorded January 11, 1963.
Yeah, that sounds right. And he was obviously came after Sonny Boy 1. And I think that was it was initially recorded when he was kind of at the top of his game, but he did a lot of touring. He's just such an entertaining guy to listen to, whether it's a song that he plays through the way he wants to, or whether he kind of stops in the middle and comments on, there's a song called Little Village in one of his recordings that is, if you want to hear just some really funny banter back and forth between him and the band that's behind him and the director or producer who was in the booth, it's, he swears at him. It's really, really funny. I almost recommended that as well. That's a great one.
But it's funny because I don't know if you remember it, but John Hyatt was in a little bit of a super group called Little Village. And then, if not the opening of the album that they recorded, it was on one of the songs where it was like, Little Village, motherfucker.
That's exactly it.
It was not from them. It was from him. So
I completely forgot that was in their album. I did remember, and I always assumed that's who they named themselves after. But I forgot it was actually in their release, because that's straight from the recording I'm talking about. Yep. He was he couldn't get the words right, and he at one point he's like, "It's a small town. It's a little village, motherfucker." And he just makes me laugh still every time I hear it. He was definitely an entertaining dude. And I know Joe Filisko is a big fan of Sonny Boy 2 as well. And again, even Bye Bye Bird, there's a study song version that Joe created that I play, completely by myself when nobody can hear me. That's nowhere near as complicated and as interesting as what Sonny Boy plays, but it sounds enough like it that it makes you feel like you're part of the tradition. So that's the main reason I wanted to recommend it. It's one of the songs I won't say I've mastered, but I've gotten decent at.
Yeah, you've sent me several recordings. You're pretty damn good with your harmonica. So
yeah, I've been practicing less, which I admitted to Joe earlier, but I still carry a couple harps in my car, and I play when I'm stuck in traffic, and I try to find some time at home my family's not around to hold their ears and run screaming from the room.
Well, tell that co-host of yours on a podcast to give you some more time. So
It's
you
fair.
can work
We got
on it a
so
little
much podcasting to do. So that's it for episode 10 of season 2 of Third Song In. We have had a blast so far. I think we have every intention of proceeding, and we hope you'll return for season 3, which should be coming relatively soon. But in the meantime, we've got a couple things we want to remind you about. We'd also like you to please follow us on whatever podcatching software you use, whether it be Spotify, Apple, Amazon Music, what have you. If there's an opportunity to rate and review us, we'd appreciate all the stars you can give us. Also, if you can follow or rate or favorite or like our playlist, we now have 2. We've got Third Song In season 1 and Third Song In season 2. Those show up on Spotify, Apple Music, Amazon Music, YouTube Music. Any support you can give us, share them if you'd like. But the more support you give us, I don't know, the happier we are.
We're always happy, man.
Always.
But we'd also ask you, I already referenced it, but to take a look at our website, thirdsonginpodcast.com. There's an easy way to listen to any of the episodes. We do have an episode spotlight where we post a video that was either referenced or is in line with the theme of that episode. We have a blog. In fact, we're posting those every Thursday. Look for the new ones each week. You can subscribe there and get notifications when they come out. We post right now our 5 out of 5 egg burritos with sour cream recommendations. We've had a couple requests to post all of our recommendations on there. We're going to look for an easy way to format so that you can look through it more readily, or even search. That's one of the next things I'll be working on for the website. But it's literally changing daily. Tom and I are making updates as fast as we can. If you have any suggestions, we're happy to hear them and can add those or make those changes to the website. We're kind of new at this, but we're pretty proud of what we've put out there.
Yeah, please visit the website. I'm very proud of it. I think Chris has done a great job constructing it, and we're going to continue to tweak it so that we can provide you with information and links to things that we've either talked about or had guests talk about. But it's also a great way to communicate to us if there are things you think we should do differently. Reach out to us through either the email address or the website.
And finally, as Tom noted, this is the final episode of season 2. We received just enough support, morally mostly, to continue. I think we have a nice loyal base of listeners, and we'd love to find ways to get more of you to listen. Maybe those who are listening can give us suggestions. We anticipate dropping the first episode of season 3 in early May, probably right around Tom's birthday when he gets even older. Before we do that, Tom has to learn how to use a whole new suite of podcast editing tools. So we may be a little delayed on that one, but we will get it out as soon as possible. We use Spotify, and they're moving over to a new suite. Meanwhile, we'll continue to post blog entries during our hiatus, and when we return, we will continue to talk pop culture from the perspective of children of the 70s and 80s. That's us. We'll continue to make recommendations from then and now, and we hope to have some new guests and even to revisit old ones.
Meanwhile, we'd love to hear from you. Please email us or contact us via the website with any questions and comments you may have. Chris and I would both like to thank the very generous and very talented Joe Filisko. You can look for his music on bittenmusic.com, bittenmusic.com. You've been listening to Third Song In with Chris Derrickson and Tom Polachek. Thanks for listening.
I got a my God, could you just, trash is a really hard word to say. I mean, it's got like 5 letters.
Sure. It's got that one
couple,
syllable.
Yeah, 1 syllable.
Yeah.
Fuck you. All right, let's go again.
It's not going to change that I sound stupid, but at least you'll hear me clearly being stupid.
Welcome to the season finale for Third Song. Oh, fuck. Welcome to the season 2.
Hello. Just this
Play,
season.
play that again. Ah, stupid ass.
All right, Nelson.
Nelson. All right, Nelson, stop laughing at me, you fucker. Welcome to the finale of season 2 of Third Song In with Tom Polachek and Chris Derrickson. Boom. See you laugh at that, Nelson, you fucker.